Clive Lewis.
Chair. Mr. Black, after 30 years of privatised water, we find ourselves not only swimming in our own excrement, but we find ourselves drinking it as well this week down in Devon, and the cryptosporidium outbreak that we've seen this week. So given that, are you confident that the model of privatised water, given that it can't even ensure our safety in our own rivers and bathing waters, our own drinking water, is the correct model and vehicle for being able to deliver water security, given an existential threat that the climate crisis represents to this country?
So the question about the model in terms of public or private is a question for the government rather than the regulator. So we regulate companies financed in a number of different ways, so from the not-for-dividend model in Wales to listed companies in England and private equity-owned companies in England. We can obviously look across the border at Scotland and Northern Ireland and with experience with publicly owned companies. I guess in terms of looking at evidence, in terms of in Scotland, we see Scottish Water as leakage performance, as I would understand it, is worse than any company in England. And on sewage discharges, they don't measure most of their storm overflows, but the ones they do show use 4 times the level in England. So it's not clear to me in terms of evidence base that looking elsewhere that the answers are necessary in the ownership model. You're absolutely right, the sector faces key challenges in adapting to climate change and in improving the environmental outcomes. It's very clear that the state of rivers, that it's not good enough where we are now, and that requires major investment. The sector has financed £200 billion of investment since privatisation, so it can do that. What we need is good data, which you've just been hearing about, and ambitious goals to drive improved performance. And we're confident that whatever model that we have, provided we've got ambitious goals, we've got accountability, and we're clear about what we're trying to deliver, the sector can step up and deliver, but it's no question that it's going to be extremely challenging.
So let's look at the investment that's been talked about. It sounds very good on the surface. So I think it's £96 billion of extra investment. But if we look at the figures for the last 30 years, we find that the cumulative total of dividends extracted since privatisation is 77.6 billion. And over the period up until now, it's 191 billion of investment. That sounds reasonable on the surface of it, until you begin to realise, like the new investment of 96 billion, it's us, the bill payers, that are paying every single penny of that investment. In fact, when you come to the owners of water and sewage companies in this country that own our privatised water system, they, since 1990, over 33 years, the shareholders of those companies have invested less than nothing. Now, that comes from David Hall, visiting professor of University of Greenwich, who's done a study on this. That's not very impressive investment levels. And I'm looking at this 96 billion. We're paying for that. None of those companies that have sucked out 77 billion are paying a single penny towards improving our very poor water system, are they?
So in terms of the facts, so there's around about £200 billion invested since privatisation, you're right. In terms of the level of dividend payments, that's around £52 billion based on Ofwat data, so we don't recognise those higher numbers. That said, since privatisation, in terms of the way the model works, is investors pay for the investment up front, and then that's recovered from customers over time. And so you're absolutely right that over time customers will pay. So on average, for £1 of capital investment, that's paid for by customers over about 30 years, like any other investment proposition. And so the benefit from a customer perspective is they would have to pay much more up front. So if you had to pay the capital investment up front, bills would be higher now than they would be if it's recovered over time. That's the way the model works. And in terms of, so the sector has, there has been a significant investment. So in terms of the level of investment of the sector, so the level of assets at privatisation of companies was around 9 billion. It stands close to £100 billion today, and around about £65 billion of that has been raised from debt, and about £35 billion have been from shareholder funding.
Just my final question, Chair, in terms of the challenges of the climate crisis. I live part-time in London because I work here, and Thames Water provides my water. As far as models go, Thames Water doesn't seem to be exactly a poster boy or girl for the industry, and yet we find that Thames Water, which inherited a debt-free company, now owns £14.3 billion of debt. Just as models go, I know you talked about Scotland, you talked about Wales. I mean, if you could see this, these are the multiplicity of holding companies that constitute Thames Water. I count 8, that's all I can count. There's probably more on there. And they've taken out £14.3 billion of money in debt. They've been servicing their dividends from borrowing against the assets. Is this a model that's working to provide clean, drinkable water in this country and is fit for purpose, given the climate crisis that's coming our way, that this is fit for purpose to provide our water and our water security in the future? Do you really think that, as the regulator?
So, just in terms of the facts, so it's true that Thames started at privatisation with no debt. They had assets of £1 billion. They have assets of £19 billion today. So the key ingredient in terms of the difference of the level of debt, they were debt-free at privatisation. They had assets of £1 billion. They have assets of £19 billion today and debts of less than £15 billion. And so, we're absolutely clear that Thames is not performing the way it ought to be. We're clear that its finances are not in the state that it ought to be. We've been clear about that for some time. It's very clear the company needs to improve its operational performance. It needs to improve its impact on the environment. It needs to improve its customer service. And they need to raise fresh equity finance. So, it's very clear that Thames need to improve their performance. But if you like, the privately funded model has meant that there has been a growth in assets in London of £18 billion over that 30-year period.